Hey, thanks for being out here today to talk about the next evolution and the next step in our Inclusive Digital Equity Alliance, or what we call IDEA strategy as a city and as a community. So if you're not familiar with IDEA, really the concept was birthed out of how do we create a more equitable framework in this city for people to get online. And I was thinking about today and thinking about the next steps of this task force, and I was reflecting on a gentleman named Kent. Some of you have heard my story of Kent, who I mentored, a homeless guy, for about a year and a half. And Kent had no internet access. He lived in the Albert House. And Kent needed a job, and Kent needed medication, and Kent liked to write poetry, but without access to the internet, you would not believe how handicapped his life was. I had to put his Sanford My Chart on my phone and allow him to use it. I had to Google things for him when he wanted research done about poems. I had to bring him to my office and go to Indeed and Monster and show him jobs and how that worked, because he couldn't do it in his own place. Because quite honestly, he couldn't swing the $40, $50, $60 a month that internet cost. And that's just one story or one example, but what we're talking about more globally is how that affects our entire community. Not only for people like Kent, but for youth, for anyone in our community who doesn't have proper access to technology. And that's really why the IDEA Task Force was formed. The IDEA Task Force was formed to take a look at that landscape in the city and do a lot of research. So instead of just assuming we knew where the gaps were in Sioux Falls, the IDEA Task Force did a ton of research, ton of focus groups. We had an incredible amount of response, and from that we were able to glean the data and determine, okay, what are the next steps and the pain points we need to address to create a more equitable framework around connectivity in Sioux Falls. You know, connectivity is very important to me. We are one of the first mid-market municipalities, in fact the first mid-market municipality in the country with an active 5G network, because I know how 5G will transform this city as that rollout and that evolution continues. Our partners at places like Midco, Vast Broadband, AT&T, they're making incredible investments in infrastructure for connectivity. Our governor has made historic investments in connectivity initiatives just this past year, the past budget cycle. And so this is our effort to say, how do we get Sioux Falls online and connected? You can even see some of the stats behind me. You know, I think that bottom one is interesting, that 1 out of 4 homes in Sioux Falls do not have an internet subscription. 1 out of 4. Now some of those it's by choice, but some of those it's absolutely not. And I think if we had 1 out of 4 homes in our community that didn't have water or didn't have electricity, we would consider that an issue that we have to deal with. And in a lot of ways, internet is as critical as those utilities. Last story I always like to share about this is I go to Haiti every year. When I go to Haiti, we do visits, we go up in the mountains, we go to some huts, and these, I mean, they are literally thatch, mud huts, charcoal stoves, and there will be a solar panel connected to a phone charger and a phone being charged, of which they top up with minutes so they can get on the internet. And that, to me, is always a really interesting example of how critical the internet is to people to conduct their day-to-day lives. And so we're here intentionally in front of the Arc of Dreams because obviously when you talk about the Arc and the gap and taking the leap and bridging the divide, we're trying to do the same thing with equity. We're trying to bridge that digital divide. And so the first stage of the IDEA task force was to collect that information, do that research. Now we're going to be moving to the next step, which is going to be much more intensive, and that's the implementation of these ideas, which will require funding, which will require collaboration, which will require a lot more work, quite honestly. But as Mike Grigsby, our Director of Innovation Technology, is going to talk about it in a minute, we have 2 great co-chairs that are going to help lead that work in this community, and very excited for that. But we wanted to invite up Janet Kiddums. Janet is here with the Helpline Center because Janet, over the course of the past year, and the Helpline have uncovered some interesting stories of what a lack of connectivity can mean to an individual, especially dealing with the crisis of 2020 and the global pandemic. So,
you know, issue of digital equity is so important to our community, and I applaud the city for all their work that they're doing on this. At the Helpline Center, we hear from folks every day of situations where they're struggling, and in many of those situations, they're struggling with technology. And I'm just going to share a few examples with you of callers that we've heard from. The first one is a young mother who has children who called the Helpline Center looking for rent assistance. The rent assistance application that she needed to complete was online. But this young woman didn't have a computer, she didn't have access to the internet. So my staff problem solved with her and looked at how we could collect the information from her over the phone and then have her mail in her documents instead of uploading them to the computer system. So she did that, and then once we received the documents in the mail, we realized that we also needed some additional documents for her eligibility. So we called her up and asked her if she could, drop those by the office. And so what we found out, in addition to not having a computer and having internet access, she also didn't have transportation. She didn't have a reliable car or a way to fix her car. So she had to send in the documents a second time. We were able to process that. She was able to receive rent assistance. But what happened in this scenario is that was delayed by several weeks because she didn't have that access to technology. The second story I'll share is with our caregiver support program. The Helpline Center makes outgoing phone calls on a weekly basis to support caregivers. And those caregivers are oftentimes elderly themselves as they're caring for another person who is elderly. And in this case, it was a woman who was caring for her husband, and he was just going to be admitted to hospice for care. So she was struggling not only with the realization that she was going to lose her husband, but she was also struggling with a lot of financial issues. The diagnosis that her husband had was pretty unique, and so there was some online specific support programming that she could access. But even though she had a computer and she had internet in her home, she couldn't figure out how to navigate the system to get that online support for her. So that would have been a great support for her during that very, very difficult time with her husband going into hospice. The third example I'm going to share is one that's very recent, that just happened in the past couple of months. We had a very sweet older woman who called us. She had been trying for months to schedule her vaccine appointment online. She had a computer, she had internet access, but she didn't understand how the technology worked, and it was very, very challenging for her to use it because she had hand tremors, and every time she tried to use the mouse, it would move, and so she couldn't quite click on where she was supposed to click. So my staff was able to work with her, get an appointment scheduled, and get her a Lyft ride to that vaccine appointment, which she was very, very appreciative of. But the end result of that is her health care was delayed by several months because she didn't have the ability to use the technology she had with her. So these are just a couple of examples of people in our community that are struggling with that technology divide. So I am so hopeful and positive and thankful that the city is addressing these issues so we can bridge that technology divide for everybody in Sioux Falls.
Thank you, Janet. So last year, the IDEA task force was started, and we were able to launch through a very gracious gift through Midco and partnership with them throughout the entire time. And the IDEA task force was really focused in on doing some of the research work around what's going on inside our community. To be able to know that there's a problem is one thing. To understand where that problem is and where the specifics, not only the needs, but the opportunities are inside that, takes a lot of time. And I had the great fortune of being able to lead the task force that was made up with a lot of the community leaders around town. And it took a lot of effort, a lot of time and investment to understand where we are and where those opportunities are. We partnered with a consultant, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and together with Purdue Research Center, we learned kind of where the where we thought the problems were, but the research that we were able to collect really pinpointed and refined the understanding of what the need is within the community. So as the task force began to put, if you will, a playbook together, we now look to transition from the task force into an ongoing alliance. And the purpose of the alliance is really to create an opportunity for the community to join into this work. This is not city work. This is community work. And what's really important is everybody that wants to or has an interest in doing this, we look to have your help and we look to have you join with us. It's important to understand that this is not just about technology. This isn't about being able to get online per se, as much as it is around quality of life. As the mayor shared, if 1 out of 4 of our homes didn't have electricity or water, we would consider this a significant issue. And the growing digital economy and the growing digital society really creates some limitations for those individuals that can't get across that gap. So the next steps that we're going to be looking at, starting in July, the Alliance will kick off its first meeting, and it'll be a passing of the torch between the task force and the Alliance. And one of the reasons that the task force was put in place was so that the Alliance itself, this collection of community members, didn't have to spend time trying to understand what the work was that needed to be done, and instead can receive that playbook and really hit the ground running. And it's essential to do that. As we start to see where these impacts are and the growing need, the growing gap, it's going to be important to bring all of our community members along with us in this journey to digital transformation. So one of the things that anyone that has interest, you don't have to have any special skills, you don't have to be a technologist, you don't have to have any real understanding of technology per se, but you just have to have an interest in helping the community together grow and evolve and kind of bridge this growing need within our community. So being able to go to the website, siouxfalls.org/digital equity, will give you information about how to join, how to lean in with us, and we'll be creating more opportunities as time goes. I'm super excited about where we're going as a community and what the opportunities are that are going to be to not only see how we bridge the divide, but how that raises the quality of life for every citizen, whether you're already already across the divide or not, already engaged in the digital society. There's going to be opportunities for growth and development for everybody. So I'm super excited to see this work continue on. And Mayor, I'll ask you to come back up and provide any closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks. Well, in closing, I want to thank Andrew Curley and Melissa Goodwin, who are going to be kind of co-chairing that work as we move forward in the community. So thanks for your commitment to that work. I think this is an exciting initiative.